The grand ballroom shimmered under 1,000 crystal lights, the kind of place where power dressed in tailored suits and walked with quiet arrogance. Tonight, the elite had gathered to celebrate the launch of yet another luxury venture by Damien Cole, a billionaire whose name carried weight in every boardroom, but whose ego often cleared a room faster than his wealth could fill it. He stood at the center of attention, champagne flute in hand, his designer watch catching the light as he laughed at something only he seemed to find amusing. To him, life was a game, and everyone around him was just a piece to be moved at his will. Across the room, near the serving station, stood Emma, a young waitress barely in her 20s, wearing a simple black uniform that blended into the background. She was there to work, not to be noticed, but fate had other plans. With quiet eyes and an easy grace in her movements, she carried tray after tray through the maze of silk gowns and polished shoes, ignoring the snide remarks from guests who barely acknowledged her existence. But there was something about her, a calmness, a quiet confidence, that caught Damien's eye. And for a man like him, spotting something he didn't immediately control was reason enough to make a spectacle. "You," he said suddenly, his voice carrying over the live band's soft tune as he pointed directly at her. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Emma froze, unsure if she had made a mistake. "Do you know how to dance?" Damien's smirk widened, the kind that made it clear this wasn't an invitation but a challenge. "I'll bet 10 grand you can't last 1 minute on this floor with me." A ripple of laughter spread through the room. Some guests shook their heads, amused by his audacity. Others whispered, already dismissing the girl in the plain uniform. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, heat rising to her cheeks. She could walk away. She should walk away. But something inside her, maybe the countless hours she had spent in a small dance studio years ago, or maybe just the sting of being publicly belittled, kept her rooted to the spot. Slowly she set down her tray. The room went still. Damien raised an eyebrow, surprised by her defiance. "Well," he taunted, extending his hand as the band struck a louder note, ready to play. "Show us what you've got, if you dare." Emma looked at him, then at the expectant faces around her, and finally back at Damien. For a moment, her lips curved into the faintest smile, one that only he could see. Without a word, she stepped forward, took his hand, and as the first beat of the music hit, something shifted in the air, something no one in that glittering room was prepared for. And in the next few seconds, the billionaire who thought he owned the spotlight would learn just how quickly it could be stolen. The band's rhythm quickened, a smooth jazz piece layered with a subtle Latin beat, and Damien led her to the center of the marble dance floor. He moved with confidence, certain of his charm, certain she would stumble and prove him right in front of everyone. To him, this was just entertainment, a moment to remind the room of who held the power. Emma's hand rested lightly in his, her back straight, her eyes calm but unreadable. She let him take the lead for the first few steps, observing the way he moved, sharp and showy, more concerned with appearances than connection. Whispers floated through the air around them. "She's going to trip," someone muttered. "Poor thing doesn't stand a chance," another chuckled softly. Damien heard it too, and his grin widened. He gave her a spin, fast and unexpected, testing her balance. To his surprise, she didn't falter. She flowed with emotion like water, her body instinctively finding rhythm where his force lacked grace. Damien's smirk faltered for just a second. He caught her eyes, and for the first time, he noticed something he hadn't before: focus, control, and maybe even defiance. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was waiting. Emma's mind was far from the glittering ballroom. As the music pulsed through her, fragments of memory surfaced. The creaky wooden floors of the old community dance hall she used to visit as a teenager, the smell of resin on worn-out shoes, the encouragement of her late mother who believed Emma's passion for dance could take her anywhere. But life hadn't gone as planned. Bills piled up. The dance hall closed. Her dreams had been shelved for survival. Tonight, though, standing in front of a room full of people who had already decided who she was, those forgotten pieces of herself started to wake up. Damien tightened his grip on her hand, sensing her composure. He leaned in just enough for only her to hear. "Enjoying your last 30 seconds. Because that's about as long as you'll last," he whispered. Emma's lips barely twitched into a smile. She didn't answer. Instead, as the music reached a swell, she subtly shifted her weight, reversing the lead. It was so slight that Damien didn't notice at first. Her steps grew sharper, more precise. The whispers in the crowd started to change tone, curiosity replacing doubt. "Wait, she knows what she's doing," someone whispered. Damien tried to regain control, but with every movement, Emma matched him perfectly and then exceeded him, adding flourishes that drew the eyes of the entire room. The band, sensing something electric happening, picked up the tempo. The air buzzed with anticipation. Damien's confidence wavered. He had meant to humiliate her, but now he felt something unfamiliar, a flicker of being outmatched. She wasn't just holding her own. She was about to take everything from him that he held dear: attention, admiration, and control. And just as the music built toward a dramatic peak, Emma's next move would leave every jaw in that room hanging. But no one, not even Damien, had any idea what was coming. Emma released Damien's hand and spun away from him, catching the beat perfectly. For a split second, she was alone in the center of the floor, her movements fluid, confident, commanding every eye in the room. The murmurs turned into an audible gasp as she executed a flawless turn that ended with her landing softly, gracefully, as if she had rehearsed it on that very marble floor 1,000 times. Damien stood frozen, unsure how to regain control. This wasn't how things worked for him. He was used to dominating a room, dictating its energy, but now the spotlight he craved was slipping through his fingers, pulled effortlessly toward a young woman in a simple black uniform. He forced himself forward, rejoining her with an aggressive move, trying to reclaim authority by taking her into a dramatic dip. She anticipated it, counterbalanced perfectly, and came up stronger than before. The crowd erupted in applause. In the corner of the room, Richard Marlowe, a seasoned investor and longtime associate of Damien, watched with keen interest. He had never seen Damien challenged in public like this. To him, this wasn't just a dance, it was a subtle power struggle, and the underdog was winning. Richard leaned toward the woman beside him, his wife, and whispered, "Who is she?" She shrugged, equally captivated. Emma, meanwhile, felt a strange mix of adrenaline and determination. She hadn't planned this moment, but now that she was in it, she refused to back down. She wasn't just dancing against Damien. She was dancing against every dismissive glance, every underestimated moment in her life. This was about proving to herself more than anyone that she was more than what they saw. Damien, desperate, switched tactics. If he couldn't outshine her, maybe he could shake her confidence. "Nice tricks," he muttered under his breath as they moved. "But this isn't going to change who you are. You're still just the help." The words stung, but Emma didn't let it show. Instead, she met his eyes with a steady gaze that unnerved him more than any retort could have. For the first time in years, Damien felt like he wasn't in control of the narrative. Across the room, one of the event's co-hosts, a well-known lifestyle influencer named Ava Sinclair, quietly pulled out her phone and began recording. She knew a viral moment when she saw one. If this video hit the internet, Damien, the untouchable billionaire, being upstaged by a waitress, it would spread like wildfire. The music shifted again, building toward another crescendo. Emma sensed it and prepared herself. She had one more move in mind, one final statement to make. As she stepped back, giving herself space, the crowd instinctively formed a wider circle around her. Damien watched, suddenly uneasy. Whatever she was about to do, he knew it could either ruin her completely, or ruin him in ways he had never imagined. And as the band hit the first thunderous note of the finale, everyone in the room held their breath. Emma stood perfectly still for a heartbeat, eyes closed, listening to the rhythm as if the world outside the music had vanished. Then, with a sudden, fierce precision, she moved. An explosive combination of spins, footwork, and graceful extensions that drew audible gasps from the audience. Her movements weren't just technical. They were alive, raw, and undeniably powerful. Each step told a story of struggle, resilience, and quiet strength breaking free. Damien tried to follow, but he was out of his depth. His earlier arrogance now worked against him. His steps were forced, mechanical, paling in comparison to the effortless artistry Emma brought to the floor. He glanced toward the crowd, expecting disapproval, but what he saw instead chilled him. Admiration. Every eye was on her, every cheer for her, not him. For the first time in his career of commanding rooms, he was invisible. The tension in the ballroom was electric. Phones emerged across the crowd, capturing every moment. Ava Sinclair's live stream had already attracted hundreds of viewers and was climbing by the second. Whispers turned into declarations. "She's incredible. Who is she? He's getting destroyed." Damien heard every word, and each one was a dagger to his pride. Emma, meanwhile, felt the weight of the moment, but instead of fear, it fueled her. She thought of her late mother again, of how she used to tell her, "When you dance, Emma, you don't just move, you speak." And tonight, she was speaking louder than she ever had in her life. She met Damien's eyes one last time mid-spin, and what he saw there wasn't defiance anymore. It was victory waiting to happen. Panic flickered in Damien's chest. He couldn't let this end with her on top. Not here, not in front of investors, not with cameras rolling. As she prepared for another breathtaking move, he abruptly cut across her path, forcing a collision. The crowd gasped. Emma stumbled back a step but caught herself with flawless balance, regaining her footing instantly. The interruption only seemed to ignite something deeper in her. She took a deliberate step toward him, no longer following his lead but commanding it. The band, sensing the fiery energy, amped up the final section of the song. The floor shook with the pounding rhythm, the audience clapping along. Damien tried to hold on, to salvage some control, but he could feel the moment slipping beyond his reach entirely. Emma was no longer just dancing. She was transforming the entire atmosphere. It wasn't about money, status, or ego anymore. It was about truth, hers laid bare in every single movement. The final notes loomed, heavy with anticipation. Emma launched into a daring sequence, one that no untrained dancer could possibly follow. The crowd rose to their feet as she spun into the air, her body a blur of motion, defying everything they expected from a girl in a plain black uniform. And as she hung suspended in that final motion, the music poised to crash into its climax, the entire room held its breath, knowing something unforgettable was about to happen. Emma landed with a flawless finish, her final pose commanding the entire ballroom. The music stopped on a perfect note, followed by a beat of silence, then an eruption of applause that shook the chandeliers above. Strangers cheered her name, though most didn't even know it. Cameras flashed, and for the first time that evening, Damien wasn't the center of attention. But just as Emma allowed herself a breath of pride, the room's doors swung open with a loud crash. A man in a sharp gray suit strode in, flanked by two assistants carrying folders. He looked straight at Damien. "Mr. Cole," he called, voice carrying over the noise. "We need to talk now." The music of celebration turned into murmurs of confusion. Damien's jaw tightened. "Not now," he hissed under his breath, but the man didn't stop. He stepped right into the center of the room, holding up a document for everyone to see. "Your newest project, the luxury resort you announced this evening, is under investigation. Fraudulent permits, environmental violations, and apparently," his gaze shifted to Emma, "someone here just gave us the proof we needed." The crowd collectively gasped. Damien's eyes snapped to Emma, confusion turning quickly to fury. "What?" Emma froze, her heart pounding for a different reason now. She had known about the resort's shady dealings. Her brother had worked on the site before quitting over unpaid wages and dangerous conditions. She had taken the risk of sending evidence to a journalist weeks ago, never imagining it would explode in front of him tonight. Damien stepped closer, his voice low but seething. "This is you." Emma didn't answer, but her silence said enough. Around them, whispers spread like wildfire. Investors were already pulling out their phones, some walking toward the exits. Ava Sinclair's live stream captured everything: Emma's defiant stance, Damien's unraveling composure, and now this unexpected scandal unfolding in real time. For Damien, this wasn't just about a dance anymore. His reputation, his empire, everything he had built on power and control was crumbling, and all of it was happening in the same room where he had tried to humiliate a waitress. He leaned in so close that only Emma could hear him. "You think you've won something here?" His tone was a dangerous whisper. "This isn't over. You have no idea what you've started." Emma met his glare without flinching, but inside her stomach churned. She hadn't expected to be exposed like this, hadn't prepared for the storm about to come. And as the man in the gray suit announced that federal investigators were en route, the room's energy shifted from awe to chaos. Damien straightened his jacket, forcing a cold smile, and turned back to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said smoothly, though his eyes burned with barely concealed rage, "the night isn't over. In fact, it's just getting interesting." And with that, the stakes soared higher than anyone in that ballroom could have imagined. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests scrambled to leave, investors whispered in panicked tones, and the man in the gray suit began collecting signatures for immediate withdrawals. Damien stood at the center, his perfectly curated world collapsing piece by piece. Cameras caught everything, streaming his downfall live to millions. Emma remained still, her hands trembling at her sides, watching the man who had just tried to crush her pride now fight to save himself. Damien turned back to her, his face twisted with determination. "You think this ends here? You've embarrassed me, but I don't go down that easy." He strode toward her, towering, ready to reclaim control in front of whoever was still watching. Before he could speak again, Richard Marlowe, the longtime investor who had been quietly observing all night, stepped forward. "Enough, Damien," he said firmly, his voice carrying authority that silenced the room. "This isn't just about a failed project. We've tolerated your arrogance and shortcuts for too long. I'm pulling every cent I've invested in your companies, and I suggest the rest of you do the same." His declaration was met with a chorus of agreement from other key figures in the room. Damien's empire wasn't just shaken, it was collapsing right before him. Damien's mask of confidence shattered. He lunged toward Richard, but before he reached him, security, called by the man in gray, intervened, blocking his path. He turned back to Emma one last time, hatred blazing in his eyes. "This isn't the end," he spat as they escorted him toward the exit. Emma exhaled shakily, the reality of what had just happened beginning to sink in. The room that had once mocked her now applauded, some offering quiet congratulations as they passed. Ava Sinclair approached, phone still in hand, excitement in her eyes. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" she asked. "The world is about to know your name." Emma shook her head, overwhelmed. "I didn't do this to be known," she said softly. "I just couldn't let him get away with it anymore." The band, unsure of what else to do, began to play a soft melody as the remaining guests slowly filtered out. Emma stood alone on the dance floor, the same place she had been humiliated hours ago, now transformed into a stage of triumph. Just as she turned to leave, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen. A message from an unknown number. "Nice work tonight. But you've just opened a much bigger door. Call me if you want to know who really funded that resort." Emma stared at the message, her heart pounding once more. She looked around the emptying room, realizing this might not be over at all. Outside, in the darkness beyond the glittering hotel lights, a black car idled quietly, its driver watching her through tinted glass before slowly pulling away into the night. Emma stepped out of the grand ballroom into the cool night air, the city skyline glowing in the distance. The noise of the evening, applause, chaos, Damien's angry voice, faded behind her, leaving a strange, almost peaceful silence. She walked slowly, clutching her phone, the message still lighting up the screen in her hand. Part of her wanted to ignore it, To leave everything that had happened inside that hotel behind and go back to her quiet life. But deep down, she knew things had already changed. News vans had gathered outside, their cameras and reporters buzzing with the story of the night. Billionaire exposed during gala. Emma saw her own face on one of the small screens through a window mid-dance. Her expression fierce and determined. She almost didn't recognize herself. She had never sought the spotlight, never wanted fame, but seeing that image reminded her of something her mother used to say. Sometimes you don't choose the moment chooses you. Richard Marlowe found her standing alone by the fountain outside the hotel. "Emma," he said kindly. His usual businesslike tone replaced with respect. "I don't know if you realize what you've done tonight. You didn't just take down Damien. You reminded people that integrity still matters. That courage can come from anywhere." He handed her a card. "If you ever decide to pursue dance again or anything at all, call me. People like you deserve a chance." She took the card, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you," she said quietly. Damien's downfall made headlines for weeks. Investigations confirmed the resort's corruption, and more of his unethical practices surfaced. He faced legal battles, lost his empire, and disappeared from the public eye. For Emma, life didn't turn into some overnight fairy tale, but it did change. She left the catering job, returned to the small community studio she once loved, and started teaching dance to kids who couldn't afford lessons. It felt right, turning her own moment of defiance into inspiration for others. The mysterious message on her phone lingered in her thoughts, but she chose not to reply, for now. Whatever bigger forces were at play, she had made peace with knowing she had done the right thing when it mattered most. One evening, months later, as she locked up the studio, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Strong, steady, and no longer afraid of being seen. She smiled softly to herself. Life had tested her in ways she never expected, but she had learned something powerful. True strength isn't about wealth, status, or applause. It's about standing up when no one believes you can. And somewhere far away, in a quiet office filled with shadows, the person behind that mysterious message watched a clip of her final dance again and whispered, "She's ready." But for Emma, the night was calm, her future unwritten, and for the first time in a long time she felt free.